like looking at the phone like, where is she? Oh yeah, she's
Come up
I'm
like
not
weeks
seeing
later.
you.
I
don't need to look at the phone.
I'm just saying words. Are the words actually words?
Yeah, that's why everyone took off their headphones and I was like, wait, Star! Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Return Cart. My name is Chrissy. We're gathered here today to talk about Scott S. Phillips' book, Man with Chihuahua. We'll have an interview that plays throughout the episode, and we have a panel of people that are different. So I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves. We'll start over here.
Ahoy, hoy, this is Terry here.
Hello, this is Sandra.
Hi, I'm Starla.
All right, so we're going to talk in general about how we received the book, as in how we liked it. Then we'll go with the interview, and then we'll talk about the interview afterwards. Does that sound okay with everyone?
Fantastic.
Sounds great.
Sounds great.
So I'll start. When I first picked up this book, I noticed that it was different than a lot of Scott S. Phillips' other books, which are mainly science fiction, fantasy. They dwell into the urban fantasy genre. He has Pete the Blood Drinker series, which is about a vampire in LA. And he hits on the comedy notes in those works as well. But I was surprised at how much comedy would be in here and how much slapstick comedy would be in here. So admittedly, I'm not too big into smaller contemporary reads, but I liked it. It took me a little bit to get used to the first couple chapters, but afterwards, I liked the plot and I thought it was just a cute read. It was a good summer read, I felt.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started reading the book, it was definitely what I would refer to as a slow burn. I mean, coming off, the protagonist wasn't really someone that I would naturally identify with, but slowly but surely through the writing style, I became very attached to the character. I mean, in the beginning, the character really isn't, I would say a successful protagonist. I mean, he's kind of down on his luck. He just got laid off. He's horribly afraid of dogs and he just gets, thrown into a situation with this dog. So it was a little unexpected how it begun, but slowly throughout the book, it really came together and you really felt yourself identifying and really feeling bad for this character.
So for me, this was my first time reading anything by Scott Phillips. I loved it right away because of that humor. It pulled me in right away.
Yeah.
I found myself literally laughing out loud while I was reading this book, which doesn't happen a lot for me. It has to be really funny. And within the first 5 pages, I found myself laughing. So I loved it, and I could identify pretty quickly with the character. The one thing that I loved that I thought was really great thing that the author did was he mentioned that he pulled in a lot of music references. So his character is picturing all this music in his head as he's going throughout his life. He's playing music, and I thought that was really awesome, and I really connected with that.
Okay, excellent. Star?
Yeah, one of the things I really like about Scott's books are his characters. I think they're really unique and kind of different than what you usually see in books. They're characters that I want to go out and go grab a bite with and talk about just everything. And I felt like these characters in particular were really good in that way. Adam, the main character, I think made some kind of horrid decisions in his life, but despite that, I think he's really relatable.
Yeah.
And the music, I agree with Sandra. There's also a playlist that he has on YouTube that you can follow along while you're reading the book, and it's a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, we'll post a link up to that because he sent it to me, and it's a great list of music references that he has throughout the book, and I like it a lot. But yeah, I agree with that. And one thing I really appreciate about Scott's characters, especially his male characters, is that they're not this macho kind of stereotypical what people would normally think of should be stoic and unemotional. Rather, he has emotion and he expresses that. His fear of dogs is very much expressed throughout.
I agree.
So that was a little bit refreshing instead of just that I have to be stoic and look off in the distance.
You also kind of see that he has that internal conflict, though. He's always worried about what he's doing isn't considered macho, the kind of coffee he goes and orders. He's concerned people won't think that he's a man, or the fact that he has a Chihuahua. his dad's always telling him he's not manly enough. It's kind of an interesting internal conflict.
Yeah, and that really does get expressed quite well when it comes down to his professional career. I mean, he's almost ashamed of the fact that he is a good writer and that that's what he wants to do with his life because, you know, what's gone on with his girlfriend and with his father, they don't really deem it as something that a successful person does. And you really see him try and work through that and eventually realize that, you know, even though he's hit a writer's block, he can still overcome that and push through it. And he still is a really good writer. But it kind of takes that entire length of the story in order for him to really come to that conclusion. He has to kind of find that self-confidence within and realize that maybe the people around him weren't building him up the way he needed to.
Yeah, those are really good points. So what I did find interesting is that there was a little bit of parallel between Greta, his girlfriend, and his father in the book, which is that they weren't showing that they were proud of him unless he was doing the work that they thought was worthy of that pride. So instead of just being happy that he's following his passions, it was, we're working for US Weekly. Oh, this is very prestigious and this means you're doing a great job. Or working as, oh my gosh, what was it? A diesel? No, not diesel.
He was working at his father's petrol shop.
Yes. So he was working at the petrol shop. So that's when his father thought he had value. And him doing the writing thing was not what he considered valuable. So I thought that was an interesting parallel. And I don't know whether he did that on purpose, but it was just a nice kind of parallel lines of thinking of who he was around and the mindsets that he was around.
Yeah, I mean, it at times while reading the novel, I found myself in the beginning, like I said, it was hard to relate to the character. He really did come off when you first read it kind of wimpy. I mean, it's kind of like, why should I care about this protagonist? What is he throwing out there that's really going to make me want to love him as a character? And that doesn't happen as quickly as it does with some other characters. It's kind of a slow lead up to it. But once it happens, you're kind of like, you know, it goes from one chapter to another and you're like, I don't really care about this character to why is this going on? Like, he deserves so much more than what he's getting out of life. Like, why is his girlfriend treating him this way? Why is his father treating him this way? Like, why doesn't he have a better, support network? And I like the fact that I went from being completely disinterested in the character to caring so much about him by the end of the novel. And the fact that it happened kind of without me even realizing it was really surprising.
There's a lot of development within it.
Yeah, and it's kind of under the plot too. It's not like overt and in your face. It kind of just happens naturally through the flow of the story as you kind of see the true character of Adam and what he really values and what he really should, take away from the people in his life. I think Curtis was one of those friends that, you really need at a certain time in your life. Someone that's, going to be there for you through thick and thin, even if, you're like Adam calling him up in the middle of the night, drunk off his butt. And he's like, well, I guess I'm going to have to carry you to the car now.
Yeah.
I love that. That was such a good scene.
Yeah, that was. All right. So if you guys don't mind, I think we're at that point where we can play the interview and then we'll talk about the stuff that's in the interview. After reading this book with all the parts we talked about, I was excited to ask Scott about his experiences and his writing, including how he started writing.
Technically, I guess I started writing when I was a little kid. And I was writing and drawing little comic books that were terrible. And actually, not too long ago, I found the first book I ever wrote, which is about 11 pages long, but it's called The Adventures of Anybody Newly Named Craig. So I guess I was wishing my name was Craig, but.
Oh, that sounds really silly.
By the way, the return cart is a great name. So.
Oh, thank you. I thought really long and hard about it. So when looking back at a lot of your work, you've done a lot of primarily like fantasy, kind of somewhat in the horror, suspense, adventure genre. But the book that we're talking about today is called Man with Chihuahua.
Yes.
And this is a very close book to you.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Can you explain what the book is about and why it's important?
The book is about a man who gets a Chihuahua, and he's actually terrified of dogs. And it is both wildly fictional and wildly autobiographical at the same time. And I always hated Chihuahuas, and the stuff about the grandmother having the Chihuahua named Nancy that was a biter.
Yeah.
Yeah, that to an extent is based in real life. My grandmother had this really fat, really mean Chihuahua named Nancy, who would just every time you weren't looking just bite your ankles. And so I was always dead set against Chihuahuas. And I had this girlfriend who Greta in the book is based on.
Yeah.
And that is very autobiographical, by the way. Who decided that we should get this Chihuahua.
Yeah, who kind of cornered in the book. She kind of cornered.
Yeah. That was. I was more in on it in real life because I saw the dog and I was like, this dog's kind of cool looking, and then they put us in the little sheep pen, you know? And that Chihuahua just started dancing around on her hind legs and went home with us. And she was named Decker, like the dog in the book, named after Commodore Decker on the Doomsday Machine on Star Trek.
Oh, nice.
Because actually my neighbor came up with the name. She came over and saw the way Decker was running around on the couch and all over the top of me and everything and said, I think you need to name this dog Decker because she's assumed command. But
she is now captain.
Yeah. And she actually died almost 3 years ago. She had this mysterious illness that was driving my vet crazy, and it just lingered for a little over a year, and she finally just went on her way. But that dog changed my life, and I just wanted to write something about her. So.
Aw. I'm very sorry to hear that she passed under those kind of circumstances, under any kind of circumstances, really. But this is a very nice ode to Decker because when I was reading this book, I was like, Decker seems like such a cool dog. And I looked at my two dogs. I was like, you guys need to model yourselves after Decker.
Yeah, she was awesome. She a lot of the stuff, the behavior in the book is dead on the kind of stuff she used to do. And in fact, after she died, I kind of referenced this in the book, but I found piles of dog food that she had stashed away in all kinds of different places. Like she was, just covering the bases in case things got tight. Because I was finding these little piles like in corners and back behind the couch and under the bed.
She's like, just in case.
Yeah. Yep.
That's very, very sweet. So you also have another dog named Casey Dog.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about Casey Dog.
Casey, she's a Australian cattle dog, and I got her in 2007. And she the woman that I was dating at the time, she volunteered at this animal shelter, and they were doing an adopt-a-thon thing, and I was just hanging out there, and I was like, we're not getting any dogs. And I saw Casey sitting in this cage, and nobody was paying any attention to her because she was an older dog and not a puppy.
Aww.
And I walked over and put my hand out, and she just put her head in my hand. I was like, oh, we're getting a dog.
And now we have a dog.
Yeah, and she loved Decker. She was like super protective of her, and
best friends for life.
Yeah, and they'd run around the yard and wrestle and stuff, and she when Decker died, for like months afterwards, Casey would go in and just lay on the floor and stare at the spot where Decker was when she died.
Wow.
So it was really sad. One of these days, I got to get her another Chihuahua.
Yeah. Gotta find a nice Chihuahua that's not an ankle biter.
Yeah.
Well, excellent. So going back to the book and Adam, who's scared of dogs because of this mean little dog that he comes into the first chapter when he's 14. And he gets bit in a place that most men would wince and feel very sympathy pains for him. And when I was reading this, I was laughing because a lot of the words he used to describe this place is very euphemistic, but very funny at the same time, right? So why did you choose those words, and did you like research them in romance novel?
Actually, it's kind of a long and strange story, but for a while I was writing for Barely Legal magazine, and I had to write as various teenage girls. So
really,
yeah. And the editor of the magazine was a woman, and she would get my stories, and she was like, your knowledge of teenage girl culture just is astonishing. I'm like, I watched MTV for an hour, I just kind of got tired of using the same old words, so I actually found a little zine that somebody published called 100 Words for Penis. So I went through that and used those up, and then just started, I used like Terwilliger in one of them, which is Dr. T in the 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T, the Dr. Seuss movie. So I just started coming up with anything I could. But I eventually got fired from the magazine because my teenage girls were too mean.
Oh.
Yeah, the editor said that.
Too mean.
Yeah, the editor said that she thought they were very accurate, but that they had done a survey, and their readers apparently couldn't pleasure themselves properly if they felt they were being made fun of. And I would have there was one where the main girl gets picked up by this guy, and she's hitchhiking, and he's like 35 or something, and she's like, "You smell funny, like my grandpa."
Accurate, but we don't like accuracy.
That's right. Yeah, and I had a friend who lived in L.A., and he told me that he could always tell. He would go and flip through the magazine. He's like, I can always tell when it's your story because there's Nazi she-males who collect Star Trek figures. And
very awesome. And actually, you hit on one thing I wanted to ask about is you based this book in L.A.
Yeah.
And is that, did you live in LA for a time?
I lived in LA for a while in 1995 until I sold my first script. And then I moved back here to help take care of my mom. Mm-hmm. And moved back again in 98 and was there until early 2000 and then came back. And I've been here ever since. But I've spent a lot of time there and done a lot of screenwriting stuff. And I don't know, it's just kind of fascinating to me to set stuff there, and the vampire series that I write, the Pete Drinker of Blood books, they're all set there too.
Oh yeah, I did see that.
And that's partly because I got the idea for Pete when I was living in this tiny one-room apartment, and I was the starving screenwriter, and I hardly ever left the building, and I was just sitting there going, God, I could be a vampire. It's like I'm just sitting in my little room here all the time. Except I don't have as much fun as a vampire would have. And I was like, hey, maybe there's something in that.
So, getting into that. So in the book, Adam ends up working at a comic book store, and I had saw that you had actually owned a small store as well. Was it a comic book shop?
I sold comics. It was called Wavy Brain.
Yes.
And I opened it in March 1st, I think, of 1993 here in Albuquerque. And I had oddball movies. I had a bunch of Jackie Chan movies, and I had old monster movies, and John Waters movies, things like that, cult movie kind of stuff. But I also sold movie posters and had mostly independent comics, and I started having some records and stuff in there about the time I sold the store. But I owned that from, I guess it was about mid 1994. I sold the store, and then I moved out to LA at the beginning of '95, and
okay,
to go after the screenwriting thing.
Very nice, excellent. So since Man with Chihuahua is kind of in a different genre than the suspense and horror, are you thinking about writing more books along those lines? Are you?
It's mostly I just kind of write whatever comes into my head. I've got another book that's kind of more just contemporary fiction like that called Squirrel Eyes, that is also wildly fictional and wildly autobiographical. But and then I've done a book called Gun Up that's kind of a mosaic novel thing. it features one of the characters from Squirrel Eyes, sort of in the process of becoming a private detective. Is what he's shooting for, kind of accidentally almost, but it's a crime novel. And so, and I've got like a list in my head of stuff I want to do. So
Okay.
The thing is, the urban fantasy stuff and things like that, they sell better. So,
Yeah.
Although Man with Chihuahua has been picking up lately, so that's kind of cool.
Oh, that's good. I liked it very, very much.
Thank you.
And you said that the relationship that Adam has with Greta is a little bit autobiographical.
Yeah.
Another little autobiographical is we have a similar friend named Starla.
Yes.
Who's featured in the book.
Yeah.
Right? So do you put the one character that's based on someone in each book, or was this kind of a special circumstance?
I think it just kind of happened that way. You know what it is like after I met Starla, I remember thinking that's a cool name. I got to use that somewhere. And so I think that's how it wound up. And plus, it fits. She's like so super nice that it's like she'd be perfect for this character. So yeah, that's.
Hey, that works out. You also have a Patreon page.
Yeah.
That people can subscribe to, and I saw poetry as being one of the options.
Yeah, it's terrible poetry though. It's not good poetry.
Terrible poetry.
Yeah, because I can't write poetry, so it's bad poetry. And there are like the different tiers, and one of them you actually get videos of me doing dramatic readings of the bad poetry.
Dramatic readings, so like putting all the heart and soul.
Yes. Yeah, but the poems are like there's one called Bungus Flump that's about my cat putting his butt on me. Things like that. So.
Are you going to come up with a collection of bad poetry and put them in book format?
I'm kind of thinking about it. So. And these are bad.
I am looking forward to it. Very much so. So do you have any works that you're working on now?
I'm working on the 5th book in the Pete Drinker of Blood series. It's called The Donut Queen. And then beyond that, I got an idea for another series I want to do, like an urban fantasy thing that's going to be sort of, this kind of post-apocalyptic-y kind of thing, but also kind of funny and crazy. And then beyond that, more Pete. And I want to do another book with the character from Gun Up. And so it's like...
Just constant.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, is Man with Chihuahua ever going to become a screenplay? Because I think it started out as a screenplay.
It started out as a screenplay, yeah. And it's funny because the script is like a lot different from the book. Because the script, at the time, I was still kind of under the influence of the girlfriend character in the book. I hadn't quite... Adam realizes what's going on a lot quicker than I did. So that's a lot different. And the script was written more as like an Adam Sandler kind of a thing. So it's really like spazzy and over the top and goofy. And the band that's in the book, in the script, it was Kiss. But, you can't get away with that in the book. So.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of kind of real world like bands and everything like that, you put in US Weekly as the magazine that Adam used to work for. Is it
Entertainment Weekly? Yeah.
Entertainment Weekly. I was like, it's a weekly.
Yeah.
And then also like One Direction is in there too. Did you ever think of making up names for like the magazines or bands, or did you think I just want to use something that people can...
It varies. Sometimes I'll do that. Like the comic shop that he goes to in the book, I mean, if you're standing at Pink's Hot Dogs and looking at that corner, it's actually Golden Apple Comics. But I thought, you know what, I'm going to like have the owner be a character and stuff, so I'm going to just make it a different fictional comic book shop. And I think I like to have little touchstones that are reality-based like that, because I think it is easier to connect with people. And I think all the song references and stuff help with that, too.
Okay, very cool. And so Adam, I'm not going to give it away for those who are going to read the book, but Adam does something to One Direction. And
in the script it was in sync. But then I realized, wait, the timeline of the book In Sync was long gone. So
this would have been the 90s, like late 90s, very early 2000s. Okay. But the action that Adam does to One Direction, did you choose that because it's not particularly illegal, or?
I just thought it would be because it was in the screenplay. It was like a little flashback, and I was like, well, that would be kind of visually interesting.
Yeah.
So, but I think it works in the book too. So.
Okay. Very cool. Hey, that works. Because I was reading it, and I was like, would that be like legally suspect? Would it not?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the result of that would be.
I'm going to look that up, though, just in case I need it for the future. So, and actually, we had met at Bubonicon. And Bubonicon is a sci-fi fantasy convention that's been happening in Albuquerque for 50 years. 50 years was this past celebration. How long have you been going to that convention?
I've been going off and on, I guess since like the early 80s. Mm-hmm. And then eventually wound up being a guest. So now I get in free.
Excellent. So you do panels primarily. And one of the panels that, unfortunately, that you missed was about embarrassing beginnings.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? So let's talk about that here. So when I went to the panel, a lot of the authors were talking about how their embarrassing beginnings, and I use that in quotes, was that they were romance novelists before they became like science fiction and fantasy.
Right.
What was your and I use that in quotes, embarrassing beginning?
Well, mine would have been, actually the first short story I ever sold was to Chic magazine, which was, like published by Larry Flint. It was kind of the sister magazine to Hustler. And what happened with that is I had written this story called Truck Stop Novel. And my friend Victor Milan, who unfortunately passed away recently, he was a science fiction and action writer and stuff. And I mean, he taught me a ton of stuff. He taught me how to write action, taught me not to let people screw around when they're supposed to pay me. But he read that story and he said, if you added some sex scenes to this, I bet you could sell this right away. And I did that. I sent it off to Larry Flint, and they called me up like a week later and said, we want to buy this story. So how's $500? And I told Vic that, and he was like, I got $500 for my first novel. So then I sold a couple more stories along those lines, and then just kind of focused more on writing screenplays for a while. But then I was going through this rough patch where I had basically become more or less homeless in LA, and was just kind of bouncing from couch to couch and stuff. And that's when I got hired on at Barely Legal and wound up writing a bunch of stories for them. That actually paid the bills for a while.
Oh, wow.
And I was also writing for something called Buttman Magazine.
What was Buttman Magazine about?
It was, specifically, but it was published by a guy named John Stagliano, who is known in the exotic film industry as the Buttman.
Oh.
and he was a friend of mine named John Howard, who's a pretty well-known underground comics artist, was doing comic strips for the magazine, and he just told the Buttman, it's like, hey, you should hire my buddy. And so I wound up writing stories for them. So I was writing Barely Legal stories and Buttman stories at the same time. So I would be like, wait, now I'm a teenage girl this week, right? And
am I talking about butts, or am I talking about
yeah. In sync?
That's a very interesting start. Barely Legal butts.
Yeah.
That is very interesting. See, so really what people should learn is that you never know what's going to open doors for you.
Exactly, yeah.
You wrote a screenplay called Drive, which was filmed in 1997.
Yeah, it was filmed in early 96, released in 97. Yeah, and it started out, it was called Road to Ruin, after the Ramones album.
Hey.
And they decided that title, the producers, in their wisdom, decided that the title Road to Ruin was too easy for critics to make fun of. But the very first review of Drive that I saw said, "Drive right past this one." But, yeah, it's a kung fu movie, basically. It's got Mark Dacascos, Kadeem Hardison, Brittany Murphy, James Shigeta is in it. And it's funny because when people see it, they always say, "Oh, that's pretty good for a ripoff of Rush Hour." But Rush Hour actually ripped us off. We came out first. And Brett Ratner even told Kadeem Hardison at the premiere of Rush Hour, "I'm really glad your movie didn't get a theatrical release because then I wouldn't have been able to rip it off."
Oh, wow. Wow, that's intense. So you also do short stories. Going back to screenplays. Have you done any other screenplays?
Yeah. Besides Drive, I wrote some really bad movies for Full Moon Entertainment. I wrote Horror Vision and Crypts. I had to write that one in 5 days.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I rewrote one called The Boy with the X-Ray Eyes that got released under the title Extreme Teens, which sounds like a porno website.
They looked at your past.
Yeah. Then I wrote, I guess, about a dozen episodes of a TV series called Kamen Rider Dragon Knight that was on the CW network. Oh. And what else? I feel like I'm forgetting stuff. There was a movie called Broke Sky that me and a friend of mine wrote, and then it got rewritten by other people extensively. And then I wrote and directed a couple of really low-budget horror movies.
Are those independent movies you're telling us about?
The Stink of Flesh and Gimme Skelter.
And those were filmed in Albuquerque, or?
Yeah, in and around, yeah.
In and around. Well, there's a lot of haunted spots in
Albuquerque,
apparently.
Both of those are actually, well, I shouldn't say this out loud, but probably going to be re-released soon, so they'll be available again. That'd be cool.
I'm crossing my fingers. I want to see. So, yes, jumping into, you also do short stories. One of the short stories is in A Career Guide to Your Job in Hell.
Yes.
And that sounds very... I need to get that anthology just based on the title. But what's that short story about?
It's about a guy who's like a garbage man, and he finds a dead dog and decides it makes him so sad and miserable that he wants to find out what happened, and he ends up like preventing a murder over the course of it. But that book it's got some really entertaining stuff in it. It's got a story by the other Scott Phillips, who wrote The Ice Harvest, and that's why I'm Scott S. Phillips in the books. Yeah. And I've actually gotten some of his royalty checks. But and there's the introduction by my friend Don Adams is worth buying the book for alone. It's just him talking about working in Hollywood. Oh, yeah. And then Nathan Long, who was a guest at this last Bubonicon, writes a lot of fantasy novels and stuff, worked for Games Workshop and stuff. He wrote a true story about the time when he was a cab driver and picking up this guy who just kept wanting to go to like taco stands and places where there were hookers. Wow. And it's but there's a lot of good authors in there, a lot of cool stories.
Oh, very cool. Yes.
And I've also got a story in a book called Tall Tales of the Weird West that ties in loosely with some of the stuff that's going on in the Pete Drinker of Blood books. And there's a Pete story in another anthology from that same publisher that's called It's a Weird Winter Wonderland. And it's like Pete going Christmas shopping for the first time since 1973 and trying to find something for his human girlfriend.
Oh, nice. Very fun, very fun. All right. Well, is there anything that you would like to tell fans of your work?
Thank you for reading my stuff.
Yes.
It keeps the doggies fed.
Yes. Keep the dogs fed and happy so that Scott can get a Chihuahua to keep Casey.
That's right. I've already got a name picked out, too. Male or female? Want to get another Chihuahua? It's going to be Stuntman Mike.
Stuntman Mike.
Yes.
I love it.
Right. I was thinking about just getting several Chihuahuas and just naming them all like Clubber Lang and Apollo Creed and Ivan Drago.
There you go. Just get a horde of tiny Chihuahuas.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you once again, Scott, for coming and talking with me today.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was the interview with Scott. It was a blast. I'm pretty sure I could probably do podcast episodes and a series just on his life because it's so interesting.
Oh, there was tons that was interesting about the interview. I mean, for instance, in the book, Adam, literally calls one of his contacts in the writing world, and the guy basically leads him on by saying, "Well, we have this opening in a magazine for you. It's gay porno," and Adam's like literally sitting in his head. He's like, "Well, I have a dog, and I've seen a few dogs. I can write about this. I can do it." He's like literally psyching himself up for this. And then at the very end, the guy's like, "Yeah, I'm just kidding."
And then he writes for Buttman.
Yeah.
Scott.
Yeah, it's so fascinating just to hear how much of that was autobiographical based on his life, whether it was his relationships, his career, his dogs. Starla, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
How does it feel to be an inspiration in a book?
I was a little embarrassed, but it was really sweet of him to do. I appreciate that he made the character so nice. Usually I find when a character's named Starla, it's usually for like comedic laughs, like Napoleon Dynamite. There's a big muscular manly woman and her name is Starla. So I'm very grateful for him. He's very kind.
So you're very glad you're the inspiration for this Starla and not
Yes.
that Starla.
Yes. So very happy.
I actually really appreciated the Starla character in this book because, she voiced what was kind of in the background going on. You kind of had suspicions throughout the novel up until that point that his girlfriend was being shady. It was obvious she was being shady. And so when that character's like, my house is further than yours and she's never been to my house at all, like ever. And he's like, really? Huh. And it's one of those points that, in a normal, in a more, I guess, loving relationship than what they would have, presented and actually had, that character probably would have been very devastated. And he even touches on that in the book. He's like, I should be like, horribly like crying. And Curtis even mentions the fact, he's like, your girlfriend just broke up with you and you didn't even shed a tear, but your Chihuahua gets taken away and you're a mess.
The healing aspects of dogs. That's what I'm going to put it to.
I loved my dog more than I loved my girlfriend. But I can actually understand.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying I can definitely understand. I'd love the dog more than the girlfriend too.
Yes. I kind of regret that Adam and Greta didn't get to have that conversation about confronting exactly what she had done. I'm curious how that would have played out.
Yeah, because the next few times he talks to her at the end of the book after they break up, it's kind of left unsaid.
Yeah, he never mentions hey, you weren't actually at Starla's house. I guess that's kind of in the character for him not to do that, to be so forward, but I'd be curious to see what that conversation would be like.
Yeah, and it's like in a perfect world, they would work out those issues and talk about it. But I actually think it's pretty true to life. Sometimes those conversations just never happen. Like you find out about it and it's just kind of fizzles out into nothing. And you use things like the dogs in your life to move on. And especially like the super sweet dogs. And
oh yeah, I think animals are definitely those really big cuddle bunnies in your life where you're just like, everything in my day has been horrible. And, no matter how bad your day was, you look at them and they're like, I love you.
Yeah. I thought it was great that Decker was his muse at the end of all this. Usually when a character has a muse, it's a person. But in this case, it was this adorable little dog. And I really liked that.
Yeah. And I really liked that he talked about her piling food around the house for the lean times.
Such a dog thing to do.
It is.
Especially small dog.
Yeah, I know. I don't know what it is, but they have to hide you can give them 10 rawhides and they'll have one that they're actually chewing on and the rest just disappear in the house. And then you're doing spring cleaning. You're like, why do I have 5 rawhides in my couch? It's like, why? I thought I gave these to you to eat. And then they're like, no, don't touch my rawhides.
Don't touch them.
I know, right?
What I find interesting is that he was making a living just writing stories for these 2 magazines that, most people be like, what are you writing for? But he was actually able to pay the bills from writing for Barely Legal and Buttman magazine.
As a teenage girl, no less. I mean, how difficult is that for a man? I mean, really think about that from like a different perspective. A grown man is writing to be, you know, a barely legal teenage girl encountering what, you know, we're not even going to speculate on the explicitive details that could go on there. But I mean, that has to take a little bit of a different mindset to put yourself in, being like, okay, I know what I need to write for this specific audience, but how do I go about writing that from the completely opposite gender and make it seem believable?
Yeah, and a life experience that we imagine he's never had.
Exactly, right?
Well, I admit I feel a little bit better that a grown man wrote those articles instead of there actually being teenage girls.
I have to say, that does make me feel a little better about things.
That way, if there was anything too shady, it was just the mind of a man.
It was the mind of a man who needed to buy dog food.
It was a man trying to take care of his dog, people. Well, and then he writes them so accurate that he gets fired for it.
That and then like what really threw me there is when he was talking about his friend earlier in the interview, where he's like, yeah, my friend was like, I know exactly who it is, you know, because I go and I read the article. It's like, I would appreciate my friends reading my articles, but I don't really know if I would want my friend reading those articles. You know what I mean? I think at that point I'd be like, thank you for supporting me. I think
that's a special kind of friendship right there.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean,
yeah, I read them for your articles. Just to make sure you got published this week. Yeah, sure.
But still, I mean, tons of like awesome life experience. And it also comes across in the book. I mean, Adam does not have an easy time with poor guy, with anything. I mean, could you imagine being in his situation? Your own father, like, lets you go from a job. You're trying to get back on your feet. And like, no matter where you're looking at, you're a joke. Mm-hmm. Like literally you're a joke. Like, how do you even like have self-confidence after that to like put yourself back out there and like continue to try and work in the same profession when people are like openly making fun of what you did?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, what's funny is that this book, it's such a light read. Like it's 200 pages. Sorry, 200 pages. And it's a light read. Most of it's very humorous throughout. It has a pretty steady tone throughout the book. However, it hits upon like emotional abuse through your significant other, because Greta's not a kind person to Adam throughout the book.
No.
And she kind of corners him into getting this dog.
I kind of wonder why. Like,
yeah, I wanted to ask her that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Like when I read that part of her just bringing the dog in without consulting him at all, I tried to get in that mindset. What would cause you to do that? Like, I wondered if that was her way of trying to get distance between them, like to start a fight.
That's what I was wondering, if maybe she was trying to get him to break up with her in that moment. Like, you violated the thing that you knew was super important to me.
Right.
I think maybe that, or maybe she already knew that she was going to be out of that relationship. Mm-hmm. So maybe she was trying to give him something to care about. But then at the same time, if she was trying to give him something to like take her place, she would have made sure that she made the phone call, right?
Right.
She would have made sure that she told them, oh, we're wanting to adopt the dog. You know, this is what we're going on. So maybe it was just to start a fight. Maybe to like, even in the middle of the book, like when she finally ends it, she comes in completely confrontational. I mean, it's not even lightly like, you know, I had a bad day. Maybe I don't want to do this. She's basically like, I don't care about how you feel. I don't care about any of this. I want to end it because you're not good enough for me. Mm-hmm. We're not out partying. We're not out doing this anymore. You're no longer the high flyer you were when I met you. So you're not worth my time.
Mm-hmm.
And she doesn't even show any care for the dog in that moment. She's like, what dog? Who cares about the dog?
Mm-hmm.
Even when the dog runs out of the apartment. I mean, Adam's out there like a flash. Like he's barely dressed, no shoes on, you know, wearing pajama bottoms, and he's running after this dog. And Greta's like somewhere lagging behind. I mean, didn't she want the dog? That's why she got the dog?
Yeah.
Like, I don't get it.
She showed no want of the pet that she got. And that brings up another interesting kind of very real to life situations where people will get pets, cats and dogs, and then for whatever reason, like the novelty wears off within a couple days, and they're like, "Oh, don't want it."
I think
no more.
people are more interested in the idea of pets, maybe, and like he touches on this with some of the other Chihuahuas in the book. People use them as accessories, and once they get tired of them, they just throw them away.
Yeah, so forgetting that they're living beings and need like love and attention and care, and instead just oh well, I have this cute little dog, purse dog.
Yeah, an accessory is a very good way to put it. You know, you make a commitment. No, it's no different than having a kid. Different in the spec of the responsibility, but you're still making, you know, a 10+ year commitment to a living, breathing animal that's going to rely on you for every aspect of its existence. So that whole interaction with Greta just kind of threw me off, because it's like, I mean, it makes you start off really not liking her character from the get-go. Like you start off the novel and you're like, okay, this chick is kind of here, but what's her purpose? Like, why is she here? Like, what is she giving to Adam to really like have this relationship? Because there's not even like an open dialogue of common interest even in the beginning. Like you don't even see like why they're even living together. It's kind of like they threw two people together and they're just living with each other out of convenience or something.
Well, and I think he hits a little bit on that, whereas that she was that pride thing where she was proud of him when he was working for Entertainment Weekly, and then when he stopped working for Entertainment Weekly, you know.
Well, she even says that, like, while she's breaking up with him, she's, you know, he's like, well, you liked it when I was working here. And she's like, well, I liked getting the free CDs and going to the parties. And it's like, really, you showed how shallow your character is from like the start and end of it. You showed, I mean. Yeah.
Well, and so, sorry, going to move on to another topic after this, because we could go like such a deep dive into their relationship on a psychological perspective. But I did want to talk about, there's one thing that threw me out of this book that was kind of weird for me, but it didn't ruin the book for me by any means. I still loved it very much, but it was using real groups, like boy groups and real things in the book. And it's not that people can't do that. It just, for some reason, just threw me off with the One Direction thing, because he talks about how they dance a lot. And I haven't paid attention to boy bands since I was like 15. So I was like, do they? But when he said it was supposed to be in sync, that's what clicked it for me. I was like, that makes sense.
See, and I do think that is a very interesting choice that he made to use real band names, because like I said, I love that character, that idea of someone who plays music and bringing in the music, but you risk that if people don't know those bands, that if they can't picture it, do they get the full effect of the story? Are they missing part of the story? Like, I'll admit, I'm dating myself here. One Direction, I got it. But I had to look up the songs because I was like, I want to know what's going on in this character's mind. And I love that there's a YouTube playlist, because I think that probably does add a lot to the value of the book. But making sure that people do have that reference, that they're not missing that, adds so much more.
Right.
Yeah. It definitely made more sense to me once he said the NSYNC. Like, I was very familiar with the boy bands growing up. So when he said One Direction, I was like, they don't do a lot of dancing.
Yeah.
I'm like, they were definitely pretty boy singers, but I mean, they were more like the cool guys that like sat there, you know, did like the fawn stuff in the background while wearing their nice jackets and stuff. They weren't really like all dancey like Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, 98 Degrees. Those bands did do more dancing. But again, you know, I had to love the idea of doing the typical Marty McFly, I'm going to like cover you in manure in your car thing. Because that is just, that speaks to classic me as a kid. Like, I mean, I giggled so much when I had to reread the scene like multiple times, because I was just like, I want to do that so bad to NSYNC. And I was like dreaming about doing it to NSYNC while reading the book, only to find out that that's who he was basing it on originally. And I was like, yeah, I could so see that. I can get behind that 110%.
Yeah, as I said, it didn't take me out too much that I couldn't enjoy the book. It was just kind of this weird moment where I was like, is that right? Huh?
I think what was a little stranger for me was the interaction between Curtis and Sonia, because, you know, you saw where it was heading. Again, you knew exactly where that train was going, but to hear Adam be like,
so much.
Yeah, I mean, you can't even see it. He's like, well, do you want me to try and seduce the hippie lady? And they're like, what? I thought about it, but would it even work? And in the end, it ends up happening anyway. So, yeah.
I liked it because you usually don't see relationships between older characters sometimes in books. So it was kind of refreshing to see these two older people doing their thing.
Yeah, there's this weird mindset that some creators have where once you hit a certain age, you're just not interested in relationships anymore. And it's like, no, I think people probably still are.
I think it's more or less the door on our innocent young minds have shut because, you know, to think about that puts you in a different mindset. You're kind of like, no, that's like imagining my teachers and parent. No.
All right. Well, we're going to wrap this up. But thank you guys so much for coming and talking to me about this book. It was really much a fun time having a conversation with Scott as Phillips. He's going to have a new book coming out in early 2019 for his Pete the Blood Drinker series, which I'm going to be reading and catching up on before then. But hopefully when that comes out, we can have him as a guest again because he was just so much fun. And it was a blast. So as our final to do, let me make a few announcements. I had the interview with Lauren C. Tafoe for her book Implanted. She's another fantastic author. We'll be recording that podcast soon. And then we'll wrap this up just by anything that you're interested in reading as a kind of send off and goodbye. So we'll start with Tara.
Oh, Lord. Let's see. There's tons of novels. I'm reading Bring Up the Bodies, which is the sequel to Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. I'm also currently reading, I cannot remember the exact name of the book, but it is a 3-book series by R.A. Salvatore that is not in his Dritz Du Erden series. It is actually a standalone series. I'm also reading another, the Elbran series from R.A. Salvatore, which is actually an adult fantasy novel series. And I'm also reading a book about a investment assassin, believe it or not. So a CEO, investment assassin who literally goes around for a company and makes sure that their stocks and trades go the way they want them to go.
Admittedly, Tara, I think you're the only person who juggles more books than I do on any given day. All right, Sandra.
Absolutely. Those sound like some great recommendations. Right now, I'm going to be starting Implanted, and I do want to check out some more of Scott's work. So I'm going to be looking at those. And then, of course, anything that Chrissy ends up putting on my desk while we're at work.
All right, what about you, Star?
Right now I'm listening to Jim Butcher's The Dresden Files audiobooks, which are read by James Marsters, so Spike from Buffy. That alone makes them fantastic.
I'm a little bit jealous of you right now.
Oh, it's so good. And I'm on book 2, which is Fool's Moon, and it's about a wizard in Chicago named Harry Dresden, and he works with the police, Lieutenant Karen Murphy, and they solve supernatural crimes in town. So it's a fun, very light read. So I recommend it.
Very fun. I actually just went to an author event today with Lauren C. Tafoe and Rebecca Roanhorse, who wrote Trail of Lightning. And that one she read a chapter of it, and me and my mom were very close to telling her, keep going, because it just sounded so good. So I'm going to be reading that. I'm finishing up Dark Places by Gillian Flynn. She's the one who wrote Gone Girl and I'm reading Dark Places. She also wrote Sharp Objects. I'm finishing up that audiobook. Oh my goodness. The Girl on the Train. I'm not very good with audiobooks. I usually read them while I'm walking, so it's been taking me a bit. It got a lot better since last time we talked on the panel. I can now differentiate the character voices. So it's been going really well. And anything else that's on my shelf, I'll try and pick up as well. Don't forget to pick up a copy of Man with Chihuahua, which can be found in local bookstores such as Page One if you're here in Albuquerque, and online. I'll post links to Man with Chihuahua in the blog, as well as links to some of his other works, such as Guns Up and Pete Drinker of Blood. I already have one of them, and I'm gonna go get the other one. I want to thank Cherry Hills Library for allowing us to record our interview. They're very gracious. I also want to thank Scott once again for taking time out of his busy day to sit down and talk with us. All right, well, signing off, this is Chrissy once again, and hopefully you get lost in the book.